Checkboxes and radio buttons are commonly used in forms to offer multiple choices. A checkbox group allows users to select as many options as they like, or none at all. Radio buttons allow only one option to be selected. A single checkbox is also often used to ask users to agree to terms and conditions. The way that you insert radio buttons and checkboxes in Dreamweaver is identical, so I'll show you just one. Now we need to begin with a form, so in the Form category of the Insert panel, click Form and then scroll down, and at the bottom here we've got options for a single radio button, a radio button group, a single checkbox and a checkbox group. A single checkbox makes a lot of sense when it's an opt-in, like asking people to accept the terms and conditions. But there's not much point in a single radio button, so why is it there? Well, the answer is that it's in case you need to add a radio button to an existing radio button group. And of course you can add a new checkbox to an existing checkbox group. They both work in the same way. So let's create a radio button group. Click Radio Button Group in the Form category of the Insert panel. It opens this dialog box. All of the radio buttons in a radio button group and also all of the checkboxes in the checkbox group need to share the same name. In this case I'm going to call my radio buttons age, and then in this field down here just give them the labels and values. Press Tab to move between the different fields. Now once you've done the first two, if you press Tab you won't get a new radio button. You have to press the plus button up here and then click Radio and add in the new label. Now I've got mine in the correct order, but if you want to change the order, just select one of the values and use the up and down arrows. The final option is to choose how it's laid out. I recommend that you stick with the default, which is to use line breaks, BR tags. It's far easier to style than a table. It's also more user-friendly. So just click OK. And that gives us a complete radio button group. Because this is asking people for their age, it's not appropriate to select one of them by default. But let's say you've got a radio button group where you do want one value to be selected by default. Select that radio button in Design View, and then down in the Property Inspector, select the checked checkbox. And if we look at that in Live View, you can see that one is selected by default, but if you try to select more than one value, you can't do it. Only one value can be selected at any given time. But if these were checkboxes, then you'd be able to select multiple values or none at all. The unique thing about a radio button group is that once one value has been selected, you can't deselect. So let's say you want to add another radio button to this group. Go out of Live View and then click at the end of the last label. Now if you look in Code View, you can see that the insertion point is just before that BR tag. If you click after the BR tag in Code View and then select Single Radio Button, you'll get it without the label. So to ensure that you get a label with it, we need to be in Design View and then hold down the Shift key and press Enter or Return to insert a new line break, and then click Radio Button. And this inserts a single radio button with some placeholder text. Now it's important to look at the difference in the underlying code of how this has been inserted. With the radio button group, the labels are wrapped around the input tag. With the single radio button, and the same happens with a single checkbox, you get the input tag and then the label is separate and it uses the for attribute to associate it with the input tag. The radio button or input tag is selected by default, so you need to change its name in the name field of the Property Inspector. All my radio buttons have the name age, so if I insert age and press Tab, it changes only the name to age. The ID remains radio and the value remains radio. So we need to change the value here to no reply, but the ID still doesn't change. The ID is radio, and this label is looking for an ID of age. So what you need to do is to change this to ID in code view to age _4, and then add the _4 to the 4 attribute in the label. And then you need to change the placeholder text for the label. And then maybe this is the most appropriate one to select as the default. So click the checked checkbox, but notice that doing so doesn't deselect this one, so you need to be careful and deselect that one manually. Now, although each radio button has got its own label, we don't have an overall label which describes what is being asked by this radio button group. And a good way to do that is to wrap everything in a field set. So select all of the radio buttons and the labels. Then in the form category of the insert panel, select field set, which is right down at the bottom here. That opens this dialog box which asks for the legend, which basically is the question. So, and then click OK. And just to see the effect of the field set, turn on live view. You can see that it's given it a little legend at the top, which acts like a sort of heading, and then everything is surrounded with a border. And of course you can style all this using CSS. The process for inserting a checkbox group is absolutely identical. It's the same dialog box. All that's different is that it inserts checkboxes rather than radio buttons, and you do need to be careful when adding an extra checkbox to an existing checkbox group. Make sure that the ID matches what's in the for attribute of the label. Use a checkbox group for multiple related options where you want the user to select any number or none at all. Use a checkbox group for multiple related options where you want the user to select any number or none at all, and use a single checkbox for form elements that require the user to opt in, such as accepting terms and conditions. Radio buttons should be used where you want only one option to be selected. Checkboxes and radio buttons in a group should all share the same name attribute.